celebration, fireworks, and new beginnings. But for some, it's a night where the unimaginable happens.
Amber was a 23-year-old college student who had always loved the quiet solitude of her family's home during the winter. Her parents were the social ones, always attending holiday parties and gatherings, while Amber preferred cozy nights at home. New Year's Eve was no different. While her parents were at a friend's party across town, Amber decided to stay behind. The weather wasn't ideal for going out anyway. A heavy snowstorm had blanketed the streets, making it hard to drive. Amber welcomed the idea of spending the evening curled up on the couch with a mug of cocoa, a blanket, and a good movie. The house was quiet, save for the faint hum of the heater working against the biting cold outside. The soft glow of string lights her mom had put up for Christmas still adorned the living room, giving the space a warm, inviting atmosphere. Amber felt at peace, knowing she had hours of uninterrupted relaxation ahead of her. By 10:30 p.m., the snowstorm had intensified. The world outside her window was a blur of swirling white, and the streetlights barely pierced through the thick flakes. Amber had just settled into her second movie when she caught something out of the corner of her eye. She turned her head toward the large window facing the driveway, unsure of what had drawn her attention. At first, she thought it was nothing, just shadows from the trees or a trick of the streetlight. But as she focused, her stomach tightened. There, at the very edge of the driveway, was a figure. Amber squinted, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The figure was tall, motionless, and standing too far away for her to make out any details. Was it a neighbor? Someone walking through the storm? She reasoned with herself, trying to stay calm. Maybe it was someone waiting for a ride. But the longer she stared, the stranger it seemed. The person wasn't moving at all. They weren't pacing, waving, or looking around. They were simply standing there, facing her house. A chill ran down Amber's spine, and she quickly turned her attention back to her phone, trying to shake off the eerie feeling. It was probably nothing, she told herself. Maybe she'd been inside too long and was letting her imagination get the best of her. 15 minutes later, curiosity got the better of her. She glanced out the window again, expecting the figure to be gone. But it wasn't. It was still there, standing in the exact same spot. Amber's heart began to race. She didn't know why, but something about the figure's stillness felt wrong, unnatural even. The snow was coming down heavily now, and yet they hadn't moved an inch. Trying to convince herself that she was overreacting, Amber pulled the curtains shut. Out of sight, out of mind, she thought. But the unease lingered. Her peaceful evening no longer felt so peaceful. Amber decided to check the house, just to be safe. She went to the front door first, making sure it was locked. Then she checked the back door, testing the handle to ensure it was secure. Every window she passed, she made sure the latches were firmly shut. The snowstorm outside seemed to muffle all sound, making the house feel eerily silent as she moved from room to room. Once she was satisfied that everything was locked, Amber tried calling her mom. She explained the situation as calmly as she could, but the noise of the party on the other end made it hard for her mom to hear. "It's probably just someone waiting for a ride," her mom said dismissively. "Don't worry about it." Amber hung up, feeling even more unsettled. Her mom didn't understand. This wasn't normal. She returned to the living room and sat down on the couch, pulling the blanket tightly around her. The TV was still playing, but she couldn't focus on it. Her mind kept drifting back to the figure outside. Was it still there? Should she look again? Her hand twitched toward her phone. Maybe she should call the police just to be safe. But what would she even say? That someone was standing in her driveway? It didn't seem like enough of a reason to call 911. As Amber wrestled with her thoughts, she heard it. A soft knock at the back door. Her blood ran cold. She froze, unsure if she had imagined it. Then it came again, louder this time. A deliberate, steady knock. Amber's breath caught in her throat. She didn't want to move, but she knew she had to check. Slowly, she got up and made her way to the kitchen, where the back door was. She grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter, holding it tightly as she approached the door. The frosted glass pane made it impossible to see clearly outside. She stood there for a moment, her heart pounding in her ears. Then, summoning all her courage, she peered through the glass. No one was there. Her heart raced as she backed away from the door, her grip on the knife tightening. Just as she turned to head back to the living room, her phone buzzed. She jumped, nearly dropping the knife. With shaking hands, she picked up the phone and looked at the screen. It was a text from an unknown number. "Nice house. Can I come in?" Amber's stomach dropped. Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of it. How did they have her number? Who was this? And how long had they been watching her? Panicked, Amber dialed 911. Her voice trembled as she whispered her address to the dispatcher, explaining what had happened. The operator stayed on the line with her, assuring her that officers were on their way. Amber crouched in the corner of the living room, her knife still in hand. Every creak of the house made her jump, and she kept glancing toward the curtained windows, half expecting the figure to appear inside at any moment. The minutes felt like hours, but finally, she saw the flashing red and blue lights of a police car outside. Relief washed over her as she ran to the front door and let the officers in. They were calm and professional, asking her to recount everything that had happened. Two of them searched the house and the surrounding property, while one stayed with her in the living room. When the officers returned, they hadn't found anyone. However, what they did find sent a new wave of fear through Amber. In the snow outside, they discovered a single set of footprints leading from the driveway to the back door. The prints didn't lead back to the street or the woods. They simply stopped at the back door, as if the person had vanished into thin air. Amber couldn't explain it, and neither could the police. They told her to stay with a friend or family member for the night, just to be safe. She packed a bag and went to stay with her parents, but the events of that night stayed with her. Every New Year's Eve since, she can't help but glance out the window, half expecting to see that motionless figure standing in the snow again. The memory haunts her, a chilling reminder that even in the safety of her own home, she wasn't truly alone. Jason, a 30-year-old delivery driver, had been working tirelessly on New Year's Eve. His plan was to finish his shift by 11 p.m. and head home to celebrate with his girlfriend, Mia. However, the night had been long and grueling, as a heavy snowstorm blanketed the streets in an icy, slippery mess. Most people had already settled in or gathered at their party destinations, and the once busy streets were now eerily quiet. Jason's car heater hummed as he leaned back in his seat, staring at his delivery app. With only a few small orders left in the evening, he considered calling it a night early. At 10:45 p.m., just as Jason was about to log out of the app, a new order popped up. The pickup was from a local Chinese restaurant that Jason knew well, and the destination was a house on the edge of town. The address, 186 Willow Lane, sounded vaguely familiar, but Jason couldn't quite place it. As he tapped to accept the order, a sense of unease washed over him. The house was located near a dense patch of woods, an area he'd driven past once or twice and had always found unsettling. The winding, poorly lit roads and looming trees created an eerie atmosphere that felt straight out of a horror movie. But the app promised a hefty tip, and Jason figured it would be a quick and easy way to end his night. He arrived at the restaurant, picked up the food, and checked the delivery details one more time. The GPS estimated a 20-minute drive to the destination, mostly through back roads. Snow continued to fall steadily, and the roads became narrower the farther he drove. The GPS guided him onto a long stretch of road surrounded by forest. On either side, tall pine trees stood like dark sentinels, their branches bending under the weight of the snow. The only light came from Jason's car's high beams, which barely penetrated the thick curtain of snowflakes falling in front of him. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel, trying to shake off the growing sense of dread in his chest. As Jason neared the address, he realized there was no house visible from the road. Instead, a small, weathered sign reading 186 Willow Lane marked the entrance to a long, narrow driveway. The driveway was covered in untouched snow, with no tire tracks or footprints leading up to the property. Jason hesitated for a moment, his gut telling him to turn around. But he'd already accepted the order, and the app's policy was clear. Canceling could affect his earnings. Taking a deep breath, he pulled into the driveway. The car struggled to move through the snow, and Jason's unease deepened as the house came into view. It was an old, two-story farmhouse that looked like it hadn't been maintained in years. The paint was peeling, the windows were dark, and the porch sagged under the weight of the snow. There were no signs of life, no lights, no smoke from a chimney, nothing to suggest anyone lived there. Jason checked the delivery app again, but there was no contact number listed for the customer. All he had was the address and instructions to leave the food on the porch. Jason sat in his car for a moment, debating whether to proceed. Finally, he grabbed the bag of food and stepped out into the freezing night. The cold air hit him like a slap, and the crunch of his boots on the snow was the only sound as he approached the house. The silence was oppressive, the kind that made his ears ring. He reached the front door and knocked 3 times. No answer. He waited a moment before knocking again, this time louder. Still, there was no response. Just as Jason turned to leave, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out to find a text message from an unknown number. The message simply read, "Leave the food on the porch and go." Jason's stomach churned. How had they known he was there? The house looked abandoned, and there were no cameras or lights outside. Feeling a growing sense of unease, he placed the food on the porch as instructed and quickly turned to head back to his car. As Jason walked back to his car, he felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. It felt like someone or something was watching him. He stopped and glanced over his shoulder, but the house remained dark and lifeless. Shaking off the feeling, he quickened his pace and climbed into the driver's seat. Just as he started the engine, a sound made him freeze in place. It was faint but unmistakable, the soft creak of footsteps in the snow. Jason's heart pounded as he scanned the area outside his car. Snow continued to fall heavily, and the darkness made it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Slowly, he turned to look back at the house. At first, everything seemed normal. Then he noticed something in one of the upstairs windows, a shadowy figure standing perfectly still, watching him. Panic surged through Jason as he threw the car into reverse and backed down the driveway as quickly as he could. His tires skidded on the icy surface, but he didn't care. He just needed to get out of there. As he reached the main road, his phone buzzed again. With trembling hands, he glanced at the screen. It was another text from the same unknown number. This time it read, "You shouldn't have come here." Jason's blood ran cold. He pressed down on the accelerator, wanting to put as much distance as possible between himself and that house. But just as he was about to relax, something in his rearview mirror caught his attention. Standing at the edge of the driveway was a figure, barely visible in the darkness. Jason's breath hitched as he realized the figure was the same one he'd seen in the window. The figure didn't move, but Jason couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching him, even as his car sped farther away. As he rounded a bend in the road, he glanced in the mirror one last time. The figure was gone. Jason didn't stop driving until he reached his apartment complex. By the time he parked and made his way inside, his hands were shaking so badly he could barely unlock the door. Mia greeted him with a smile, but it quickly faded when she saw the look on his face. He didn't tell her the full story, just that the last delivery had been unsettling. That night, Jason couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the dark, empty farmhouse and the shadowy figure in the window. He promised himself he would never take another order near Willow Lane again.